How's it going, everybody? This is Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Today I'm bringing you the first of many Singleton deck guides to come, and we'll be starting with Blue-Black Tezzeret. This deck is my personal favorite to run in Singleton. It has some powerful synergies and is explosive in the right hands. There are a few different strategies to win with this deck, but they all hinge on playing tons of cheap artifacts early, which synergize with your big win conditions. Let's start with our cards that put on a lot of pressure in the mid game and work our way up from there. Blue-Black Tezzeret runs a Tezzeret's Touch, Traxos, Scourge of Kroog, Herald of Anguish, and Metalwork Colossus. While Tezzeret's Touch is vulnerable to removal, putting it on a cheap artifact on turn 3 puts a lot of pressure on your opponent and requires them to answer it early. By the time they've dealt with it, you're typically ready to drop an even larger threat. Because the artifact is returned to your hand when it is destroyed, I like to put Tezzeret's Touch on a card that has an enter the battlefield effect, like Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot, or Prophetic Prism. Ornithopter is a good target due to flying, but I typically only target it in the late game if the board is at a stalemate. One of the best targets is Aethersphere Harvester, as it becomes a 5/5 flyer that doesn't need to be crewed and can gain you a good amount of life. Traxos, Scourge of Kroog, is one of my favorite cards in the deck. Most of your cards are historic, so it's extremely easy to untap him. Voltaic Servant is a card meant to be played with Traxos. You get to untap him at the end of every turn, essentially giving Traxos vigilance. A 7/7 Trampler on turn 4 is a great way to close out the game. Herald of Anguish is one of the best cards in the deck. Because of how many cheap artifacts we run, Herald can come out early and decimate your opponent's board and hand. His ability to force your opponent to discard a card on your end step is huge in Singleton. His activated ability provides great removal and is also a sack outlet for Marionette Master, but we'll get to her later. Metalwork Colossus is a great creature that you can get out early, especially if you have a Gilded Lotus on the battlefield, which will reduce the cost of the Colossus by 8 all by itself. Just remember that its cost is only reduced by non-creature artifacts. Blue-Black Tezzeret also runs Zahid, Djinn of the Lamp, Karn, Scion of Urza, Marionette Master, and the Antiquities War. Zahid, Djinn of the Lamp has impressed me more than I initially thought it would. I've never cast this card for more than 4 mana in this deck. It's reliable, efficient, and a phenomenal body for 4 mana. This is one of the deck's best cards as it requires little setup and tons of pressure for your opponent. Karn, Scion of Urza provides tons of card advantage, a must for Singleton formats. His ability to make artifact tokens that get +1/+1 for every artifact you control gets out of hand quickly. Marionette Master is one of my favorite win conditions in the deck, especially when the board state is at a stalemate. The best way to use her is to put the +1 counters on her instead of creating the 3 servo tokens. A good amount of the artifacts in this deck can sack themselves to trigger her ability, dealing 4 damage to your opponent. But if you have a Herald of Anguish or a Syndicate Trafficker on the field, you can quickly close out the game. Syndicate Trafficker is the best card to use with Marionette Master because it only costs 1 mana to sack an artifact, and for the fact that it makes blocking the Syndicate Trafficker a nightmare for your opponent. The Antiquities War is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It rarely misses on its first 2 triggers and is game over on its 3rd. Just make sure to play around Settle the Wreckage. This card also works really well with Spell Swindle, especially if you cast it on the turn before the 3rd trigger. Remember, treasure tokens are artifacts. This usually leads to an auto concede from your opponent. That brings us to the deck's titular card, Tezzeret the Schemer. This card is brutal in this deck. His +1 helps you ramp into your more expensive spells, and the artifact tokens are extremely relevant. Most of the time, you don't want to be cracking them, but saving them for his ultimate or for the Antiquities War. Most of the time, his -2 can kill any creature on the board because of the amount of artifacts you control at any given time. If you can ultimate Tezzeret, you will run away with the game. The artifacts aren't just creatures until your end step, they are permanently 5/5s. So what enabler cards do we use in this deck? Like I said before, this deck runs on cheap artifacts. Early artifacts like Renegade Map and Traveler's Amulet help with mana fixing, but don't be scared to just leave them on the field if you can afford to do so. Servo Schematic provides 2 artifacts for 1 card, helping with improvise in a big way. One of my favorite cards in the deck is Pacification Array. It's cheap, so it works well in the early game and is one of the more powerful cards late game. Cantrips such as Prophetic Prism and Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot are incredible in the early game, and Prophetic Prism's help with mana fixing is very relevant. Glassblower's Puzzle Knot also provides a form of card advantage with its scrying ability, and the energy works well with Aethersphere Harvester. Treasure Map is also great for finding your threats, and the treasure tokens synergize with Tezzeret and the Antiquities War when you aren't cracking them to draw a card. Skittering Surveyor and Cultivator's Caravan are also great for mana fixing, and the Caravan is a legitimate threat before you get out your bigger bombs. Ornithopter is another cheap artifact for the deck, but if I'm looking to cut cards to make changes, this is the first card I'm cutting. Let's talk about the other creatures in the deck. We're running a Contraband Kingpin, Scrapheap Scrounger, Glint Nest Crane, Walking Ballista, Padim Console of Innovation, Quicksmith Spy, Gearseeker Serpent, and a Bastion Inventor. Contraband Kingpin is one of the best creatures in the deck. It's great on defense while you establish your board, and the scry ability is triggered almost every turn, sometimes twice with cards like Servo Schematic. Scrapheap Scrounger is cheap and powerful and provides a continuous threat to your opponent. Glint Nest Crane helps you sift through your deck and is a good defender, which is where you typically are with this deck in the early game. Walking Ballista is great removal and damage when you need it. Padim is great card advantage, but where it really shines is by making your artifacts hexproof. One of my favorite cards in the deck is Quicksmith Spy. When it enters the battlefield, target artifact gets tapped to draw a card for as long as Quicksmith Spy is on the battlefield. Targeting a Servo Schematic, a Puzzle Knot, or your Prophetic Prism provides tons of card advantage. Gearseeker Serpent and Bastion Inventor are typically cast very early and are just great creatures in the deck. I also run one Reverse Engineer for additional card draw. Let's talk about removal. We run a Baral's Expertise, River's Rebuke, Vraska's Contempt, and a Phyrexian Scriptures. Baral's Expertise, Phyrexian Scriptures, and River's Rebuke all act as one-sided board wipes that will close out the game once resolved. Planeswalkers are especially strong against this deck, so Vraska's Contempt and River's Rebuke are critical to the deck's success when facing one. As for lands, we run a Spire of Industry, Inventors Fair, Arch of Orazca, Zalfir and Void, Aether Hub, Field of Ruin, Evolving Wilds, Memorial to Genius, Drowned Catacombs, Fetid Pools, 6 Islands, and 5 Swamps. With the amount of cheap artifacts on the board at once, turning on Arch of Orazca is extremely easy. Inventors Fair is great for life gain and can be activated to get a Traxos or even a Pacification Array when you need it. Blue-Black Tezzeret is an awesome deck, but one of my favorite parts of casual formats like Singleton is working with the community to build on archetypes even further. Let me know in the comments what you would change and how you would improve the deck. Which cards would make this deck even better? I've included the deck list in the video description for you to easily import it into Arena. Also, congratulations to our beta key giveaway winners, Circle God, Flamer Fire, and Gabriel Rega. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.